Hi everyone, this is video 3 of week 2. So we've just looked at one of Wittgenstein's criticisms of the view that the word not is a so-called referring expression, i.e. that it's meaningful in virtue of its referring to some kind of logical object, the nature of which we don't have details on. Depends on who you are, what exactly you think that logical object is. But Wittgenstein doesn't like this idea anyway at all, that logical expressions are meaningful in virtue of referring. We've just seen that Wittgenstein thinks that you get a proliferation of facts on that view, on the view he doesn't like, and that he thinks that's absurd. But now I want to look at perhaps a more central criticism of Wittgenstein's. More central because it fuels his desire to find an alternative answer more to a greater extent than does the previous criticism, I think. So let's call this criticism a criticism about inference. Now, we've just said in the previous video that if a sentence is true, like the cat is on the mat, then you can always infer that some other sentence is true, namely a double negation of the original sentence. So if the sentence the cat is on the mat is true, then it's also true that it is not the case that it is not the case that the cat is on the mat. Now, Wittgenstein agrees with this. No one would disagree. This is a valid inference. What he doesn't like is an explanation of its validity. This is what Wittgenstein wants to get at. Why is that inference valid? It is valid, but being a philosopher of logic, he wants to know in what does that validity consist. And he thinks if you think the word not refers, you can't explain the validity of that inference, or your explanation is inadequate. So Wittgenstein thinks that the inference from one sentence to its double negation is inadequately explained on the view that the word not refers. Why does he think this? Well, we said in the previous video, if the sentence the cat is on the mat is true, this is an assumption that Wittgenstein shares. If that sentence is true, it's true because some fact exists in the world consisting in the arrangement of the cat, the mat, and a relation of being on. And we also said that if you think the word not refers, then the sentence, it is not the case that it is not the case that the cat is on the mat, is true, just in case a fact exists in the world consisting in the arrangement of the cat, the mat, the relation of being on, and two instances of a logical object. So there's some fact out there consisting in an arrangement of all these things, and it's that fact that makes the doubly negated sentence true. So the first thing to notice is that if you think the word not refers to an object, and you think that sentences are true in virtue of facts existing, facts which consist in the arrangement of reference, then the striking thing about this inference between one sentence and its double negation is that they are true in different cases. So it's different facts make each of these sentences true. So the cat is on the mat is true if one fact exists, a fact with relatively few constituents, and it is not the case that it is not the case that the cat is on the mat. That's true if another fact exists, a different fact, a fact with relatively more constituents than the original fact that we discussed in the non-double negated case. So you've got two sentences. You can validly infer one from the other in either direction. But if you think the word not refers to an object, then both these sentences are true in different cases, i.e. different facts have to exist to make these sentences true. And Wittgenstein thinks that this is wrong. He thinks it's wrong because, generally speaking, if you've got one sentence which is true, just in case a fact exists, and you've got another sentence which is true just in case a different fact exists, you can't always infer the one from the other. Right? So the sentence, the cat is on the mat, let's assume that's true. Let's give another sentence, the dog is on the mat. These two sentences are true in different cases. Different facts have to exist for each of these sentences to be true. But you can't infer one from the other. You just can't. You can't infer from the cat being on the mat that the dog's on the mat. And you shouldn't be able to infer that. That's not a valid inference. So Wittgenstein thinks that if you think the word not refers, you've got a situation a little bit like the two sentences of the cat being on the mat and the dog being on the mat. You've got two sentences which are true if different facts obtain. And it's not, generally speaking, always true that sentences which are true if different facts obtain can be inferred from one another. That's not generally true. So Wittgenstein thinks, firstly, we need a further explanation of why you can infer from one sentence that its double negation is true. Because they're made true by different facts. And it's certainly not always the case that sentences made true by different facts can be inferred from one another. So then Wittgenstein says, well, how can you infer from the cat being on the mat that it's not the case that the cat's on the mat if each of these sentences is true in some different case? And he thinks what you're kind of forced to do is to assert a kind of logical law. The logical law might be like this. Whenever a certain fact exists, another fact exists, including all of the constituents of the first fact, and two more instances of the logical object not. Wittgenstein thinks that you have to kind of postulate a law like that, a law which concerns the behaviour of logical objects. But Wittgenstein doesn't really think this is good enough. He doesn't really think that's an explanation of the validity of the inference. Or it's not a satisfactory explanation. It doesn't give you any insight or illumination. It just asserts that that's the case. Deal with it. If the cat is on the mat is true, and a fact exists making it true, then it must be the case that some other fact involving two further instances of the logical object not also exists. Wittgenstein thinks that you're forced to give an explanation like that if you think that the word not refers. That's the main point. You have to assert these logical laws if you think that a sentence and its double negation are true in different cases. You have to assert a logical law asserting that these different cases always come together. Wittgenstein doesn't think that's satisfactory because he thinks the logical law itself is completely opaque or mysterious or inexplicable. So he says, why should it be true that whenever you have a fact, you also have some other fact with two instances of the logical object not? That's just a kind of, Ramsey calls it a brute necessity concerning the behaviour of logical objects. And Wittgenstein doesn't think that really explains what the validity of the inference consists in. And Ramsey thinks also likewise that doesn't really explain why the inference is valid. It just says that it's valid. It just asserts the holding of one kind of fact whenever you get some other kind of fact. So Wittgenstein thinks basically that if the word not is conceived of as referring, and you think that when sentences are true, they're true because facts exist facts consisting in the arrangement of reference, he thinks that if you think all of that, then you haven't really got a good explanation of why inferences which are valid are valid. He's not disputing the validity of the inference from one sentence to its double negation. He's disputing whether his opponent can explain that validity satisfactorily. And he thinks if you introduce these reference of the word not, it's not clear why the inference is valid. And importantly, he thinks he's got a better alternative. He thinks he can give an explanation of why that inference is valid, which is much more satisfying. And that's what we're going to discuss in the very next video. So we've looked at the criticism from the proliferation of facts. That's the previous video to this one. We've looked at this criticism with respect to inference and the postulation of logical laws, which don't do any explaining, they just do asserting. And now we're going to look at Wittgenstein's different conception of what the word not really means. Okay, that's in the next video. Thanks for watching.